She stands at the center of the room as if it belongs to her and to no one else on earth. The shutters are half closed, turning the daylight into narrow blades that slice across the wooden floor, and the August heat presses against the walls like a living thing. The air holds the smell of sweat, dust, and old cotton, the scent of fields that never rest and bodies that never stop working. In one corner, a girl no older than 16 stares straight ahead, her hands clenched so tightly that the skin around her knuckles has gone pale. Her dress is coarse and worn, the fabric rubbing against skin already marked by labor. Her bare feet press into the floorboards as if she could force herself through them and escape into the earth below. Across from her stands a boy, taller, still more boy than man, maybe 18, maybe 19. His eyes search for any place to rest except on her. They flick to the wall, to the rug, to a crack in the plaster, to the polished legs of a chair. His jaw is tight, and a vein throbs in his neck. He looks as though he wants to speak, to protest, to name what is happening in this room, but the words die before they reach his tongue. Between the two of them stands his mother. On this plantation in Georgia, her word is law, as complete and unquestioned as any statute written in a courthouse miles away. She raises her hand, not to strike, but to point, first at the girl, then at her son. There is no hesitation, no discomfort, no sense that this moment is unusual. Her gaze moves over the enslaved girl with the cool calculation of a bookkeeper evaluating a line in a ledger, of someone who has long ago learned to see a human body as value, as future labor, as future sale. To the girl, every second stretches into an eternity, but to the woman, this is simply another decision in a day filled with decisions about cotton, feed, cloth, and punishment. The girl's heart thunders in her chest, though her face remains as still as she can make it. She has learned that any sign of fear can be read as defiance, that any plea can be twisted into an offense. She knows where she is. She knows that this is Georgia, where generations of enslaved people have been forced to bend over rice, cotton, and sugar, and that the law offers her no protection from what is about to be demanded of her. Her hands loosen, then clench again. There is nowhere to run. "Do as I told you," the woman says to her son, her voice steady, the tone she might use to instruct a servant to lay another place at the table. This is not the first time she has given this kind of order. It will not be the last. The boy swallows hard. Somewhere in his memory, there are fragments of a different life, or at least what he once thought was different, childhood games in these halls, being held in his mother's arms, lessons in scripture and duty. He remembers her reading verses about family, about honor, about purity. Now those same lips shape commands that twist all those words into something else. He has been raised to believe that his family's land, his family's name, and his family's wealth are his birthright. Today he is learning, if he has not fully understood before, exactly what his mother is willing to do to increase that wealth without buying another person from the auction block. The girl has no such illusions. She has been property from her first breath. She was born on this land, like her mother before her, and under the laws that rule this country, her status followed her mother's, not her father's. It does not matter if the man who fathered her was enslaved or free, black or white. The law says that she inherits her mother's bondage, that everything she is, everything she will be, belongs to the person who owns her mother. That same law says that any child she bears will belong to the same owner, will be counted as part of the increase of this estate. The mother watches them both, her sons and her slaves, as two different kinds of investment. To the neighbors in town, she is an accomplished figure. They see a woman who runs a large plantation, who dresses well, who attends church, who sits in the front pew with her sons, nodding solemnly as the preacher speaks of morality, obedience, and God's order. They see her gloved hands, her polite smile, her donations to causes that make her appear pious and refined. What they do not see is this room, this choice, this moment. Outside, the plantation stretches in every direction. Fields of cotton spread across the soil that white Georgians have spent decades seizing and clearing, using enslaved Africans and their descendants to build fortunes that grow with every harvest. By the middle of the 19th century, cotton has become king, and Georgia's Black Belt is thick with plantations whose owners rely on enslaved labor not just to work the fields but to reproduce themselves. The end of the transatlantic slave trade has not diminished the demand for labor. It has merely shifted the focus inward, onto the bodies of enslaved women, whose children now represent natural increase, a source of profit that requires no journey across the ocean. On paper, this is a simple calculation. If an enslaved woman bears children, the number of enslaved people on the plantation grows. Those children can be put to work in the fields, in the house, in the yard. They can be hired out. They can be sold. Each birth is another line of value added to the slaveholder's wealth. Some enslavers quietly encourage marriages between enslaved people they believe will produce strong offspring. Others, more ruthless, arrange forced pairings, pushing two people together with the same ruthless practicality they apply to breeding livestock. On this plantation, the calculation has gone further. The neighbors have noticed that, over the years, this estate has recovered from financial trouble more quickly than expected. Where other properties have struggled, this one has somehow expanded its enslaved population without buying as many people at market. There are whispers of good management, of a remarkable knack for keeping the slave quarters full without heavy spending. But no one asks exactly how this is being achieved. Or if they suspect, they do not put their suspicions into words. The mother walks closer to her son, lowering her voice so that only he and the girl can hear. "Do you want this house one day?" she asks him. "These acres? The men who answer to you, the respect in town, the name your father left you? This is what it costs. This is what is required." He understands the threat hidden in her questions. If he refuses her now, she has the power to cut him off, to favor another son, to punish him, or to take out her anger on the people he sees every day in the fields and cabins. He has seen what happens to those who cross her. He has watched an enslaved man whipped until he collapsed for less. He has heard about the mother whose child was sold away after she begged for mercy. The violence is no secret in the cabins. It lives in every scar, every empty space where someone once slept and no longer does. The girl feels their eyes on her but keeps her gaze fixed on a knot in the wood, on a tiny imperfection in the wall that becomes, for a moment, the whole world. She has heard stories, too. Stories of women on other plantations in Georgia, in Virginia, in the Carolinas, taken to private rooms, to barns, to fields, used by their owners and overseers as if their bodies were rights granted with the deed to the land. She knows that the law does not recognize what happens to her as a crime. In most slave states, rape of an enslaved woman is not legally defined as rape at all. If she resists, if she fights, she risks whipping, being sold away from everyone she loves, or worse. Her survival strategy is to endure. Later, when historians try to reconstruct what happened on plantations like this, they will find only fragments of the truth. Court documents, when they exist, will rarely mention sexual violence against enslaved women. Plantation ledgers will record births and deaths, not the circumstances that produced them. Slaveholders will describe healthy increases in their letters, praising their own management. Only in the narratives and testimonies of formerly enslaved people, in the rare court cases where someone dared to speak, in the whispered recollections passed down through families, will the scale of this exploitation become clearer. But the girl in this room does not know anything about future archives or scholars. She knows only that her body has been claimed, that her womb has been turned into a field where someone else will harvest the results. She knows that the child she may carry after today will not be hers to keep, even though it grows inside her, even though she will bear the pain of childbirth and the burden of nurture. The law of partus sequitur vent rem, borrowed from ancient Roman principles and adapted by colonial lawmakers, has stripped her of any claim to her own children by declaring that a child follows the condition of the mother, and that condition is slavery. The mother in the room has learned to use this principle to her advantage. She does not have to pay a trader for new laborers if she can produce them on her own land. Every pregnancy she forces, every child born, is another reinforcement of her wealth, another guarantee that her sons will inherit an estate that grows even without the arrival of ships from Africa. The boy stands at a crossroads that has already been framed for him as no choice at all. He has been taught since childhood that these people are property, that their bodies exist for his family's benefit, that the rules he follows with white women do not apply here. His mother has made certain of that. She has shaped his understanding of manhood to include dominance, control, and the belief that what he wants, he can take, as long as the person he takes from has no legal standing to refuse him. He moves forward. The girl closes her eyes. There are no screams. Those were trained out of them long ago. To cry out is to risk punishment, to draw attention is to invite more violence. So she goes silent, retreating into some inner room of her mind where she can lock the door and wait for this to be over. Her body is here, but she tries to send her spirit somewhere else, somewhere her mother once told her about, a place across the water where their ancestors walked free. When it is done, the boy steps back, his face drained of color. He does not look at her. He does not apologize. To apologize would be to admit that something wrong has occurred, and his mother has taught him that this is not wrong. This is strategy. This is preservation. This is what wealth requires. The mother nods, satisfied. She turns and walks toward the door, her skirts rustling against the floor. Go back to your cabin, she tells the girl without looking at her. The girl does not answer. She simply gathers what remains of herself and moves toward the door, her legs unsteady, her hands trembling. She steps into the hallway, then out the back door, walking across the yard toward the quarters where her people live, where no one will ask her what happened because they already know. If you are drawn to the hidden, unfiltered corners of history that most people would rather forget, if you believe these stories must not be buried again, make sure you subscribe before we continue. This is only the beginning. That night, in the cabin she shares with her mother and two younger siblings, the girl lies on a thin pallet and stares at the ceiling. Her mother sits beside her, holding her hand, saying nothing because there are no words that can change what has happened. Around them, the other cabins are filled with people who have endured similar horrors, who carry scars both visible and hidden, who wake each morning knowing that their bodies, their labor, their children, all belong to someone else. The boy, meanwhile, lies in his own bed in the big house, staring at his own ceiling. He does not sleep. He thinks about what his mother told him, about duty and inheritance, about the cost of maintaining their way of life. He thinks about the girl's face, the way she went still, and he tries to push the memory away. Over time, he will become better at pushing it away. He will learn to see her and others like her as his mother does, as instruments, as means to an end. Or he will drink himself into numbness. Or he will find some other way to live with what he has done and what he will be asked to do again. This is how systems of violence perpetuate themselves. They do not require monsters. They require ordinary people who are taught that some lives matter more than others, that some bodies exist only to serve, and that cruelty, when it is profitable, can be renamed as duty. Over the next several years, the pattern continues. The girl becomes pregnant. She bears a child who is taken from her arms not long after birth and given to another enslaved woman to raise while she is sent back to the fields. She will bear more children, each one adding to the plantation's inventory, each one carrying the blood of the family that owns them. Other girls are called to the house. Other sons are instructed. The mother keeps meticulous records of births, noting which children are strong, which ones are sickly, which ones will be valuable in 10 years when they are old enough to work full days in the cotton rows. The plantation thrives. The mother's reputation as a shrewd manager grows. Visitors from neighboring estates come to learn from her methods, though she is careful never to speak too plainly about what those methods entail. Instead, she talks about discipline, about proper feeding schedules, about rotating labor to avoid exhaustion, about incentivizing good behavior with small privileges. She does not mention the orders she gives her sons in private rooms, the way she has turned reproduction into a controlled enterprise, the way she has made her own bloodline an instrument of enslavement. In town, when she walks into church, people greet her warmly. The minister praises her charitable donations. Other women admire her clothing, her poise, the way she manages such a large household without a husband, having been widowed years earlier. They speak of her as a model of Southern womanhood, strong and capable, devoted to her family and her faith. They do not ask about the babies born every year in her slave quarters. They do not wonder why so many of those babies have features that look disturbingly familiar. The enslaved community, however, knows. They speak in hushed tones about the lady in the big house and what she forces on her sons and on them. They warn their daughters to stay out of her sight, to make themselves as invisible as possible, to never be alone when a white man is near. They teach their children survival strategies that have been passed down through generations, how to read danger, how to avoid it when possible, how to endure it when avoidance is not an option. Some try to resist. There are small acts of defiance that never make it into official records. A girl who takes herbs to prevent pregnancy. A young man who tries to protect his sister and is whipped for it. An older woman who confronts the mother directly, demanding that her granddaughter be spared, and is sold south as punishment. These acts of resistance are crushed quickly and brutally, serving as warnings to anyone else who might think of challenging the established order. There are also those who run. In the dead of night, when the overseer is asleep and the dogs are quiet, a young woman slips away from the plantation, heading north toward a freedom she has only heard about in whispered stories. She carries nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate hope that she can outrun the men who will come looking for her. Some who run are caught within days, brought back in chains, and made examples of. Others disappear into the networks of people who help the enslaved escape, becoming part of the underground railroad that ferries thousands to freedom over the course of decades. A few make it all the way to northern states or to Canada, where they tell their stories to abolitionists who write them down, publish them, and use them as weapons in the growing fight against slavery. One of these escaped women, though her name has been lost to time, speaks to an abolitionist society in Pennsylvania about a plantation in Georgia where the mistress uses her own sons to breed enslaved women. The audience listens in stunned silence. Some refuse to believe her, insisting that no white woman, especially one of good standing, would participate in such depravity. Others, more familiar with the realities of slavery, know that she is telling the truth. They have heard similar stories from other parts of the South. They understand that the system of slavery is built not just on labor exploitation but on sexual violence, on the systematic dehumanization of black bodies, on the legal erasure of black people's rights to their own children, their own families, their own futures. But even among abolitionists, there is discomfort with these stories. They are too ugly, too raw, too difficult to present in polite society. So while some narratives of formerly enslaved people are published and circulated widely, the most explicit accounts of sexual violence are often edited out or softened. The focus shifts to beatings, to family separations, to grueling labor, all of which are terrible enough. But the full scope of sexual exploitation remains largely hidden, tucked away in private letters, in coded language, in the silence of women who carry their trauma to the grave because speaking about it brings no justice, only shame and disbelief. Back on the plantation, the mother grows older. Her sons are now men in their 30s, hardened by years of participating in their mother's system. One of them has taken over day-to-day management of the estate. He continues what his mother started, ordering enslaved women to his bed, fathering children who will never carry his name but will work his fields. Another son has moved to a neighboring county, married a white woman from a prominent family, and started his own plantation. He brings with him the lessons his mother taught him, the belief that enslaved people exist for his use, that their bodies are resources to be exploited in every possible way. The mother herself, now in her 60s, spends her days in a rocking chair on the veranda, watching the fields she has built through calculated cruelty. She feels no guilt. In her mind, she has done what was necessary to preserve her family's wealth and status. She has ensured that her sons will inherit a profitable estate, that her grandchildren will grow up in comfort, that the family name will endure. She believes she has been a good mother, a good manager, a good steward of the resources God gave her. The fact that those resources include human beings, that her wealth is built on the broken bodies and stolen children of enslaved people, does not trouble her. She has lived her entire life in a society that tells her this is normal, that this is right, that this is the natural order of things. The Civil War comes. Georgia becomes a battleground. Union and Confederate armies march across the state, tearing up railroads, burning crops, freeing enslaved people as they go. The plantation, like so many others, is thrown into chaos. Some of the enslaved people flee immediately, running toward Union lines, toward the promise of freedom. Others stay, uncertain of what freedom will mean, afraid of the violence that surrounds them, unwilling to leave behind family members who are too young or too old to travel. The mother watches her world collapse. Her sons join the Confederate Army, fighting to preserve the system that has made them wealthy. One is killed in battle. The other survives but returns home to find the plantation in ruins, the fields overgrown, the slave quarters empty. The people who once had no choice but to obey are gone, and with them, the foundation of the family's wealth. In the years after the war, the surviving son struggles to adapt. He tries to hire formerly enslaved people as sharecroppers, offering them a portion of the crop in exchange for their labor. Some return, desperate and with nowhere else to go, but the arrangement is barely better than slavery. They are paid almost nothing, kept in perpetual debt, tied to the land through contracts that trap them in cycles of poverty. The son, raised to see black people as property, cannot adjust to seeing them as workers with rights. He resents their freedom, resents the fact that he can no longer force them to do his bidding, resents the loss of the wealth and power his family once held. The mother dies a few years after the war ends, bitter and unrepentant. She never acknowledges what she did. She never expresses regret for the women she violated, the children she commodified, the lives she destroyed. To the end, she believes she was right. But the people she enslaved do not forget. In the decades after emancipation, stories circulate in black communities across Georgia about the plantation where the mistress used her sons as breeders. Families whose ancestors were enslaved on that land carry the memory forward, passing it down through generations. Some of those families discover, through oral history and later through DNA testing, that they have white ancestry, that their great-great-grandmothers were raped by white men who were the sons of the plantation mistress. The knowledge is painful, a reminder of the violence embedded in their family trees, the forced unions that produced children who were enslaved by their own fathers. For white descendants of the family, the story is buried. They do not speak of it. They do not acknowledge it. In family histories written decades later, the mother is remembered as a strong woman who managed a large estate during difficult times. Her role in systematically sexually exploiting the people she enslaved is erased, replaced with sanitized narratives of Southern gentility and resilience. The sons are remembered as Confederate heroes, their participation in the breeding system conveniently forgotten. This is how historical memory works in the South for more than a century after the Civil War. The horrors of slavery are minimized, romanticized, or ignored altogether. Plantation tours focus on the architecture of the big house, the beauty of the gardens, the bravery of Confederate soldiers. The voices of the enslaved are largely absent, their stories reduced to footnotes, if they are mentioned at all. The sexual violence that was endemic to slavery, the forced breeding, the children born into bondage because their mothers were enslaved, all of this is pushed to the margins, deemed too uncomfortable, too ugly, too damaging to the myth of the lost cause. But in recent decades, historians have begun to recover these stories. Through careful research in plantation records, court documents, formerly enslaved people's narratives, and the testimonies of their descendants, a fuller picture of slavery has emerged. It is a picture that includes not just labor and physical punishment, but systematic sexual violence, forced reproduction, and the commodification of black women's bodies. It is a picture that forces us to confront the fact that slavery was not just an economic system but a system of total control, one that sought to strip enslaved people of every aspect of their humanity, including their autonomy over their own bodies and their own children. The plantation in Georgia where a mother used her sons to breed enslaved women is an extreme example, but it is not an isolated one. Across the South, enslaved women were raped by their enslavers' sons, by overseers, by hired hands, by any white man who had access to them and knew he would face no legal consequences. The children born from these rapes were enslaved, adding to the wealth of the plantations where they were born. This was not an accident or a side effect of slavery. It was built into the system, codified into law, and practiced openly with the full knowledge and acceptance of white Southern society. Today, the descendants of enslaved people continue to reckon with this legacy. Some have traced their family trees back to specific plantations, discovering the names of the people who enslaved their ancestors, learning the details of the violence their great-great-grandmothers endured. Some have found DNA evidence linking them to white families who refused to acknowledge the connection. The work of recovering these histories is painful, but it is also necessary. It is a way of honoring the people who survived, of naming the crimes that were committed against them, of insisting that their stories matter. For white descendants of enslavers, the reckoning is different. Some have begun to confront their families' histories honestly, acknowledging the wealth and privilege they inherited through the exploitation of enslaved people. Others resist, clinging to myths of noble ancestors and benevolent masters, unable or unwilling to face the truth. But the truth does not go away because it is denied. It lives on in the unequal distribution of wealth, in the racial disparities that persist in education, healthcare, housing, and criminal justice, in the intergenerational trauma that continues to affect black communities across the country. The story of the Georgia plantation where a mother turned her sons into instruments of breeding is a story about power, control, and the capacity of human beings to rationalize even the most horrific acts when those acts serve their interests. It is a story about a woman who saw other human beings as property and used every means at her disposal, including her own children, to increase her wealth. It is a story about a society that protected her, that enabled her, that looked away even when the truth was obvious. And it is a story about the people who survived her cruelty, who carried the memory of what happened to them, who passed those stories down so that one day, the truth could be told. This is not just history. This is the foundation on which modern America was built. The wealth generated by slavery, the laws that protected enslavers, the racial hierarchies that justified treating black people as property, all of this shaped the country we live in today. The refusal to fully confront this history, to teach it honestly in schools, to acknowledge its ongoing impact, is a refusal to deal with the roots of racial inequality. Until we face what happened on plantations like the one in Georgia, until we understand the full extent of the violence and exploitation that defined slavery, we cannot truly move forward. The people who were enslaved on that plantation, the women who were raped, the children who were born into bondage, the men who watched their families torn apart, they deserve to be remembered. Their stories deserve to be told. And the woman who orchestrated their suffering, who used her power to inflict unimaginable harm, she deserves to be named for what she was, not a genteel Southern lady, not a shrewd manager, but an architect of sexual terror, a woman who turned her own sons into rapists and built her fortune on the bodies of people she refused to see as human. This is their story. This is the truth that was buried for more than a century. This is the darkest chapter of American history, told without apology, without sanitization, without looking away. If this story has moved you, if you believe that these truths must be told and retold until they can no longer be ignored, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this with others who need to hear it. History is not just about the past. It is about understanding how we got here and what we must do to create a more just future. Thank you for watching, and thank you for refusing to look away.